Welcome new and seasoned viewers to the Weird and Wonderful channel. Today we're exploring how contemporary television has resurrected folk horror, reshaped it, and coaxed it into new and deeply unsettling directions. Modern folk horror has slipped quietly into our living rooms. It doesn't always arrive with the thunder of ancient drums or the silhouette of a wicker giant. Sometimes it's subtle, an eerie melody in the background, a ritual only half glimpsed, a village that feels just a little too polite. But the roots are unmistakable. A genre reborn. Folk horror has always lived in the soil. Old customs, old fears, the tension between modern life and older, stranger ways of being. But for decades it hid in the shadows, a niche curiosity remembered mostly by fans of The Wicker Man, Blood on Satan's Claw, and the BBC's Ghost Story for Christmas. Then, something shifted. Audiences started craving stories that felt older than civilization, more personal than jump scares, and far stranger than traditional horror. And television, of all places, became one of the best platforms for bringing these uneasy tales to life. With long-form storytelling and atmospheric slow burns, TV embraced folk horror so completely that today, it's one of the genre's most fertile grounds. Let's stroll through some of the standouts. The return of ritual on the small screen. Modern folk horror thrives on ritual, its power, its secrecy, and its ability to shape a community. The Third Day, starring Jude Law and Naomi Harris, might be one of the clearest examples of the ritual reborn. Set on the mysterious island of Osea, reachable only by a tidal causeway, the series traps its characters in a looping cycle of grief, belief, and manipulated myth. It's the closest thing in recent years to a TV companion for The Wicker Man, with its own folk festival, masks, and a cultic community convinced it's preserving some greater cosmic order. Everything is tactile. Handmade idols, pagan pageantry, ecstatic devotion, and always that sense that the landscape itself has demands. Britannia. Then there's Britannia, a psychedelic descent into Iron Age mysticism. This show leans into the strange, the surreal, the downright hallucinatory. The Druids are depicted not as wise sages but chaotic forces of nature, dangerous, unpredictable, and capable of bending reality. Britannia isn't historical fiction, it's what if the land remembers fiction. And in its best moments, it taps straight into the primal wildness that defines folk horror. Suburbia, as a haunted landscape. Not all modern folk horror takes place in isolated villages. Some of the most unsettling stories happen right inside contemporary suburbs, where the veneer of normalcy hides something much older. The Devil's Hour. This British psychological thriller is drenched in uncanny atmosphere. While it isn't pure folk horror, it borrows heavily from the idea that certain places, and certain people, are touched by something ancient and unresolved. The show's quiet domestic settings make every flicker of supernatural disturbance feel more intimate and more invasive. It's the uncanny next door at its best. Inside Number 9. This anthology series occasionally dips its toes deep into folk horror, most notably in episodes like The Harrowing, The Trial of Elizabeth Gadge, and The Bones of St. Nicholas. These episodes marry black comedy with old superstitions, impossible bargains, and sacrificial rites hiding under the polite manners of English life. When Inside Number 9 does folk horror, it reminds us that the old ways never really left. They're just waiting behind a closed door. Folk horror meets true crime and urban legends. Modern folk horror isn't afraid to blend with other genres. Channel Zero. This anthology series takes internet creepypastas and reframes them as updated folk tales. Stories like No End House and Butcher's Block feel like the natural evolution of oral tradition, not whispered around a fire, but passed through message boards and digital folklore. This gives the show a uniquely modern texture. Ritual meets rumor. Myth meets meme. And the results can be deeply unsettling. American Horror Story, Roanoke. Love it or hate it, Roanoke is one of the most overtly folk horror seasons of the anthology. Lost colonies, woodland spirits, blood-soaked customs, ancestral curses, it hits all the genre beats. Combine that with the framing device of reality TV and reenactment, and you get a satirical but surprisingly sharp take on how modern culture mythologizes the past. The land still rules, even now. At the heart of modern folk horror is a simple truth: the land itself is the antagonist. TV has leaned into this beautifully. The Wilds. While technically a survival drama, the island setting plays with folk horror implications: ritual, sacrifice, chosen ones, and the question of whether isolation shapes belief or reveals it. Midnight Mass. One of the best shows that ever hit Netflix, this show has it all. Though often categorized as religious horror, Midnight Mass is profoundly folk horror in its examination of how closed communities cling to tradition, reinterpret miracles, and sacrifice reason for belonging. The island becomes a pressure cooker for groupthink and ritualized violence. It's folk horror dressed in a cassock. The Essex Serpent is moody, romantic, and drenched in superstition. This adaptation uses the idea of a sea serpent to explore how communities respond to unexplained phenomena. It's the fear of the unknown colliding with the scientific curiosity of a modern world, and superstition always has the upper hand. Why folk horror thrives on television today. Television is uniquely suited to folk horror because it lets dread simmer. Rather than 2 hours of rising tension, you get 8 episodes of slow decaying certainty. Here's why it works so well today. 1. Long-form storytelling evokes myth. Ritual repeats. Beliefs deepen. Characters sink into the landscape rather than run from it. 2. Audiences are craving atmosphere. We've grown weary of loud, jump-scare horror. Folk horror offers patience, eeriness, and mood. 3. Rural anxiety never went away. Even in the modern world, we're uneasy about what lies beyond the edge of the map. Folk horror gives shape to that unease. 4. It speaks to cultural disconnection. We've lost our communal rituals. Our ancestors would barely recognize the way we live. Folk horror fills that void with something dark, ancient, and whispering. 5. It reflects our fractured relationship with nature. As climate anxiety grows, stories about land, sacrifice, and ecological imbalance hit harder. The new shape of the genre. Modern folk horror on TV isn't a copy of the classics. It's evolving. Instead of isolated villages, we get suburbs that feel wrong. Instead of pagan rites, we get curated digital myths. Instead of rural landscapes, we get islands, forests, and forgotten pockets of the modern world that feel untouched by time. But the core remains: people, land, belief, and the terrible cost of clinging to old ways. Some shows whisper it, others shout it. But all of them are part of the new wave of folk horror storytelling that's flourishing today. The old ways never truly leave. Modern folk horror television reminds us of an unsettling truth. Progress doesn't erase the past. High-speed internet and smart homes won't protect us from ancient customs embedded in the soil. The land keeps its own history, and sometimes it wants to remind us. So whether it's a remote island, a quiet village, or a too-perfect suburb, modern folk horror continues to thrive because it taps into something universal. The fear that behind every tradition lies a shadow, and behind every shadow lies something waiting to be believed in again. And that's why folk horror on television isn't fading anytime soon. If anything, the rituals are only beginning. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And be sure to check out my books on Amazon. Be seeing you.